Doug's a psychiatrist. He studied with Conan and has been working as a somatic psychotherapist for really longer than most of you have been alive. And he's just a really gifted teacher and wonderful person. And I'm so glad to have you here. So
Thanks, Marcia.
work with us about
Thank
touch.
you.
Yeah.
Am I in the camera frame here? It's a frame.
We're just doing like
So,
that.
So first, thank you for having me. And let me just introduce my daughters here tonight. It's not a part of your cohort. And Weston, no. Heather. And she's the school counselor at Kip Academy. And her school psychologist came with her. So
Hello, everybody.
in Somatics, we like to bring in mainstream counseling people to come.
With the
Do a
contaminate
little
their work.
something. Okay, so let me just tell you a bit. In my notes I gave to Marshall, and in the back is like 2 pages of my go-to books. If you have an interest in it, just let Marcia know and she'll get a copy of it. So Marcia asked me to come, and I started going through my lecture notes from 30 years ago and 20 years ago, looking at all this topic, and then I started writing a lecture, and, it was kind of this lecture, and then I was starting to illustrate the points I was going to lecture about, and so I came up with these stories that I was going to tell to illustrate, and when I got to about the 3rd version of this a few weeks ago, it was, why not just tell the stories? So I'm just going to tell you the stories. And I think that, except for Heather and Cameron, you're going to know the theory already from Marcia's classes and other classes that you've been in. And we can sort of dig into that a little bit if you want. And we'll see how we go. So the second thing is there's a couple of 3 exercises that I have for us. And I'm very sensitive about exercises. So as a clinician, I know, because I've had students in every program in this school and JFK in my practice, right? And they come and tell me the day after the awful things that happened in their classes. So first and foremost, I want you to take care of yourself. The exercises are simple, but it depends on how you are tonight, whether you want to do something or not, right? So do it or not. The second part, doing is very important, and observing is very important. It's an old Chinese proverb. 2 birds, one pecking the worm in the tree, the other sitting on a branch, watching. Fast friends. So the watching is also important. So if you want to sit up here with me during the exercise, perfect. If you want to do the exercise, perfect. Okay, so take care of yourself in that way. And this is nighttime. So, if you get tired, walk around, go outside. This is somatics. Lie down, stand up, whatever you need to do. I'm fine with that. And eating too. Do we take a break in this thing?
It's up to you.
Just go.
Either people can take their own breaks as needed, or we can take it.
Let's just take your own breaks and go eat when you need to, use the bathroom when you need to, come and go, whatever. It's much better to be awake for 10 minutes than sleepy for an hour, right? So take care of your brain that way. So the first story that I have for you tonight is I call it The Heart and the Brain, all right? So I'm moving. All right. So one of the incredible things I think about somatics has to do with what we call holism. And I just hate that we spell holism starting with an H, because holism starts with a W. It starts with the word whole, right? And so, whole. So imagine that each of us started as a one-celled animal, right? One cell that got ovum, got penetrated by a sperm. Fascinating little fact. The point of entry determines the point of the first division, determines the axis of the backbone in the body. Unbelievable kinds of whatever it's called across our lifetimes. But imagine this one cell, it's going to divide into 2 and into 4 and into 8, and it's going to divide into 3 germ layers, and then it's going to... And at a certain point in our embryonic development, the brain, these ectodermic tissues, and these endomorphic tissues that are forming blood lakes that will become vessels. Okay, so this is what's going to become the heart. You get that right here? Okay, so, but they're lying side by side here. So they're lying, you've seen pictures of little embryos, right? They're just starting. So here's the brain, and here's this blood lake that's going to become the heart. And this blood lake is just starting to pulse a little bit. It's just a blood cells, vessel, right? These cells are starting to put out electrical signals. And at this point in development, they lie 4 cell layers apart. Now, if you imagine a cell layer, if I picked up a sheet with 4 cell layers, you could see me right through it. It's that thin. We're talking about just microns thick. Right across there. And what starts to happen there developmentally is that the oxygen from these blood cells start to diffuse directly into the brain across that cell layer. And these electrical impulses start to affect that blood lake, which starts to pulse with the electrical impulses coming from the cells. We're going to develop a little bit, but let me make another amazing little fact. Those cells become the operative cells for the vagus nerve, which control the heart in the adult brain. Those cells. And this is like 1,000 cell divisions later. They're going to develop into the control in the brain for the heart. You see what I'm saying? It's like, so it starts in this positional way. Now, and here's the story. I've just been rambling till now. The story is that these 2 parts are going to ultimately separate about as far as your brain from your heart. My fist's about a foot apart, something like that. So these are going to get to be about a foot apart, your heart and your brain. But here, they were passing oxygen directly through to the brain. And here, those electrical signals were coming directly into the heart. So as they begin to separate, they separate as they penetrate the other with their signals. Okay? So that as they begin to separate, vessels form carrying blood from that blood lake into the brain, right? And so as they separate, rather than directly diffusing, they begin to have these blood vessels coming in. First very small, getting bigger, getting thicker, carotid arteries, venous, the veins. They're developing as they separate. And the nerves begin to develop from the brain into the heart. I mean, they never leave it. Do you get that point, what I'm making? Mm-hmm. So, let me say it once more. These 2 organs only separate as they interpenetrate each other with the vessels of the messages that they carry to each other. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So there's no separation. It's the point. We're talking about holism here, right? So that the connections are so intimate, it's as if they were still one cell. But they've migrated over this sort of body space, connecting with each other. Okay? So, Now here's the mental exercise. We've got 20, 25 organ systems in the body. So what I want you to imagine here, every one is going to become some organ, right? Like kidneys and intestines and hormonal systems. So I want you to imagine in your brain that this one cell begins to multiply into 3 trillion cells, approximately our bodies, and every organ is interconnected with every other organ. So can you kind of get this mental picture of every one starting to give its signals through various channels or highways, some through hormones that go through blood, some through nerves, things like that. And so we get this image. Every part of the body is a localized specialization of a general function that was present in the first cell. Meaning the first cell pulsated, had electrical impulses, took in food. Well, that ovum operates a little differently once it's released, but think about a paramecium or an amoeba, a one-cell animal, right? So it's got elimination, it's taking in food, it's got nervous systems, it's got, it goes towards light, away from light. They have eye spots in paramecium, they have head to tail, cephalocaudal development, those kind of things. So our body, while it's so big, is integrated in this way. I just, we get this idea of holism, and then we spell it with an H, and then we think about a hologram, like a piece of glass that carries the whole image. You've seen those? It's not like that. It's much more intimate and visceral and tissue-oriented, this holism that we have. So we're going to get to touch, right? But if you touch this organism anywhere, you touch it everywhere. This is the point, right? Now we're going to get to some about what that is. That's the first story. Any questions about that? We have a small group, so you can speak up, right? I did, in the longer lecture, have a thing about hormones, but let me just say about our integrated body with the hormones. A hormone is just a neurotransmitter with a distant receptor. When we think about nerve-to-nerve transmission of neural, we give all these psychiatric medications and things like that, but we don't operate so much and understand these hormones. We haven't even found them all yet, because we have receptors that we don't know what attaches there. And there's not going to be a receptor in the body that doesn't have some operative function. Every cell in your body has 1,000 receptors or more on it for input of neurotransmitters or hormones. Our understanding of cells has exploded, If you imagine a cell now, it's not just a muscle cell, it's got 1,000 receptors on it. Okay. So I'm going to do a little exercise on holism, and let me just explain it for a second. This is not involving pairs, but what I'm going to ask you to do in just a moment is to stand up. And then I'm just going to ask you to, you can't quite see it, but I've just put my weight on my left foot. And I kind of off-weighted the right foot, right? Or I could put my weight on my right foot. This is not a yoga exercise. This is a self-perception of how you feel when you stand on one foot and when you stand on another. Okay? So if you just find a little space for yourself, and I'll kind of talk you through it. And if you want to come up here and watch, or stay in your seat and watch, that's perfectly all right. The exercise sort of works best if your feet, you're not like that because you can't off-weight. So just put your feet kind of closer together. And if you're right-handed, you know, everybody's either right-handed or left-handed. 1% of the population is kind of ambidextrous perfectly. Anybody like that here? Okay, so if you, and we're also right-footed or left-footed and not necessarily the same one. We're also right-eyed and left-eyed and not necessarily the same one. It's good to know those things about your own body. But if you're right-handed, just bring your weight onto your right foot. And just let all the class go and just feel inside yourself what you feel like when you've got your weight on your right foot. And then come back to both feet. Simple little exercise, right? Now just go over to your left foot. Notice, we're looking for a little gradient here. What's different? Come back to center. Now what I want you to do is just to practice that a little bit on your own and kind of experiment. So if you need to try it again on your right or try it again on your left, just take a minute and notice whatever you're noticing. Just bring your attention back. Maybe just staying where you are. Just anybody that can say anything about what they noticed. Or nothing. They were absolutely the same. No. Anybody have a comment?
Well, standing on my right side brought my body some stress. I was relieved going to my left, and I felt comfortable and safe on my left compared to my right.
Comfortable and safe on the left, more stressed on the right. Perfect, great, thank you. Anybody else?
Or micro-wiggling on my left. Yeah. And or stable.
Stable on your right, or wriggling. I like that, micro-wriggling.
Yeah.
I like watching yoga classes.
Yeah.
I felt the same as my foot
Yeah, that
Yeah.
micro-wiggling on one.
on the left, yeah.
Anybody else?
I felt an awareness of heaviness when I was on my right, and like more burdened. And then when I went to my left, it was like a drastic shift of like feeling lighter, and then the desire to like dance a bit.
What was the last thing?
The desire to like dance, or like the thought of dancing.
Going to have a dance soon, apparently. Fabulous, fabulous. So, come sit again. We'll do this again a bit in pairs, and I'm going to have you touch each other on one leg or the other. So any comments or observations about what that's about? Yeah.
I felt a distinct difference in my psoas and my diaphragm on one leg versus the other, and I know personally that will impact how I'm handling stress and how oxygenated I am. And on my right side, it definitely felt tighter, and on my left side it was more relaxing. I kind of like sunk a little bit more, and the right side felt more activated, and my belly was tighter. And there's a difference in breath with that too.
Yeah, somatic students, psoas, diaphragm. Awesome, just awesome.
She came in with that.
Yeah, or maybe opera singers know about the diaphragm. Thank you. Perfect. She has a snort.
Yeah. My mom snorts sometimes.
Yeah, my wife. Okay, so again, you're telling us the difference. So any comments, because you're deep in theory in this program, what are we talking about here? What's happening with this little shift of weight from one side to the other. Any thoughts about that? We'll keep going, but I just want you to also be thinking, see, I didn't give the lecture right, so I'm just trying to pull it out of you. Because I'm sure you've had it. But what's happening there?
I thought of like right brain, left brain activation, so like the right side activating the left side and vice versa.
You get entirely different sets of brain activations. You bet.
My right side still felt like it was working even when I was eating on my left side. But when I was eating on my right, my left could just totally relax and lift up.
Right.
But when I was eating on my left, it was like my right wasn't trusting my left.
Perfect. Perfect. Do you see that bodily we manage ourselves on a moment by moment basis as to our attitude, our feeling, our lightness, our heaviness, our contactfulness, and as simple a thing as shifting changes all of that, can change all of that, right? If we're aware. I mean, we're not talking about, this is important, we're not talking about doing anything right or wrong. We're talking about how we do things, right? That kind of simple shifting. Okay. Story number 2. This time goes by quickly. Story number 2 comes out of from Daniel Stern. I don't know if we still study him. The Interpersonal World of the Infant and more recent books. These were terrific for me. But he did a simple little experiment. So first a lot of observation. He's a wonderful observer. You know, as were Bowlby and Ainsworth and Mary Main, these attachment people. But what he noticed when watching this group of moms with little toddlers in Boston, that he was looking at rapprochement, that time when the baby starts to kind of walk away. And what he noticed is that often the mom would give the baby a little tap on the butt, like, off you go, right? And the baby would just toddle on off. Every now and then, that little baby would look back at mom. I mean, at some risk here, you know. And he got curious about that. What was going on? And he speculated that the baby sensed something in the tap that said, all is not right with mom. I better not keep going. That was his speculation, right? So then he took these moms and using this little pressure thing, he taught the moms to make that tap 10% more. You see what I mean? Just to add a little more pressure on the tap. Every baby wheeled around. So he said, well, 10% is way too much. It's a subtlety here. So he taught them to do 5%. He tried to teach them to do 2%, 1%. There was no change in that tap that would not wheel that baby around. Do you follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There's a tap that the baby keeps walking, thinking all's right. If it changes this less than he could measure, if it changed at all, the baby wheeled around and made eye contact with the mother.
You mean right away instead of farther along?
Immediately. Yeah, with the tap,
Yeah.
right there, yeah.
See if we can get a better picture.
Remember this one. So as these organs separate, they separate as they interpenetrate each other with the signals of their tissue. And the paradigmatic thing is nerves, arteries, and vessels. These are all two-way things. Nerves have efferent and afferent. In one nerve are impulses going to the brain and from the brain both ways. And arteries and veins are carrying blood both ways, right? As the child, I just want you to get this, as the child separates from the mother, They only separate as they build channels of communication back and forth. And that's what Daniel Stern saw, was a channel of communication, where when it changed, the child reverted to the eye contact. If the eye contact was wrong, the child would revert to the lab. The child can only separate as it builds channels of communication across space. Okay? Following what's already happened developmentally in the body. Right? So that these things are actually felt. As somatic students, you would know that while wheeling around is an observable behavior, it's based on a felt sense of something's wrong. You follow what I'm saying? So it's like that. And that felt sense is a feeling, is an attitude, is a structure that goes through this holistic, organismic self-feeling, right? That we were talking about all these organs being interconnected. But now we're saying the baby is interconnected with the mother. Simple little story. But what it suggests to me is that we're not separate. And that in fact we know a great deal more about each other than we think we know, than we think, with a thought process. That, and some of you, I know that you students are maybe in some different years, right? Is that true? So maybe you're not in classes together. But I would even say that here we are in this room for an hour. We know more about each other than that could fill volumes, right? If you can move from one foot to the other and feel different, imagine how much different it is to our shape, our posture, our movements, our eye contacts have this deep organismic flow going with each other in space. Okay. So now maybe we'll get to touch a little bit. I know I'm not just giving you techniques about touch, but maybe you'll get them. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you're willing, is to choose a partner. And this is all that's going to happen. Marcia, can you? So I'm going to stand beside Marcia. I'm already ready. But we don't do that casually with clients. I did it with, we know each other many years. So I'm going to ask Marcia, I want you to stand on your one leg or the other. And then I'm going to touch your shoulder. Just like that. Okay, so you're on one. And I'm just going to have you sense what that is. And then stand on the other leg. Sense yourself there. That's the whole exercise. Now, it gets more. If we had a whole day, I would ask Marcia to stand on one leg. I would stand on one leg. Because what's communicated in this posture is different than in this posture. Never mind this posture or this, or right, just this is felt differently. Thank you. If I were to ask you to do this, when I first started to do this exercise, it was, Weston, can I use you? Just stay where you are. Just stay where you are. If I were to, may I touch your shoulder? Yes. If I were to touch right there and say, what did you get from that touch? What was I communicating to you? Did you get anything from that?
That I need to scoot over.
Right? This was a message to move, right? But can you imagine that the entire panoply of human emotion can be communicated in this? How about this? Right? I mean, just that. We communicate volumes. We communicate volumes in making eye contact. I mean, think about the infant and the mom and caretaker and dad and brothers and sisters. And that eye contact is already hugely impactful, and this touch brings a whole other dimension to it. So if you're willing, get a partner and just find a place in the room, and I'll talk you through the simple exercise. And if you'd rather watch, just bring your chair up here and stay with me for a minute, okay? All right? So anybody can tell us a story. Anything you noticed? Any observation? That's where learning really happens, when you talk to each other, right? So anything you noticed that you could share? Chanting.
I noticed in meeting a new person and doing an exercise with a new person, it felt like the context of meeting a new person sort of informs our feeling of safety. And so there's some, like in the touch, that felt like it was such the lightest touch, but still had a big impact because, in my opinion, maybe it had to do with like the nervousness of meeting a new person and touching a new person, and a lot of the context, so that the actual, like, tried to go really slow and be really kind and like, oh, nice to meet you, and then like, oh, yeah.
Does it look like E.T., you know?
Yeah,
Yeah, so you got that sort of new person energy there.
Yeah.
In the touch.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I definitely had different experiences of anticipation on each side. Like my right side, even before she touched me, I was already like, There's this like attitude.
Can you put more words on that? I got that.
It felt like before she even touched me, I wanted to push back against her. Yeah. And then on my left side, I didn't have that at all. I was able to be. I wasn't anticipating her touch, and I kind of yielded to.
It was more receptive,
Yeah.
more pushback and receptive. Nice, very nice. Diaphragm?
I didn't notice.
But never mind, it was effective. We just weren't paying attention. But anyway, anybody else?
So I noticed that when you touched me, when I was on my right foot and you were here,
Yeah,
pushing this way made me feel like I was going to fall.
yeah.
And then still being in this orientation to you, touching this way, I felt, even though I switched feet, it didn't knock me off as much. And so when I did it with Therese, we did it once that way with me, similarly. And then when we did it with her, we experimented with being face to face, just to see if that orientation changed anything. So I'll let you report about
Did
that.
you
But
notice any difference?
Well, I hadn't done it the other way, so I couldn't compare. But the first time we did it, I was expecting her to touch me on the other side than the side she did. And so I was like a little bit in my head with the expectation, so that it threw me off. And then the second time, I was more grounded, and I balanced.
Now, did you notice that Therese was in any different orientation when you went to either touch?
we were facing each other.
Yeah, that, but she was
The
expecting.
second time,
Yeah.
when she was ready for it,
You knew she was ready
well, I could tell when I touched her.
when you touched her, because that's exactly where we're going next.
Oh.
Yeah. That's great.
Because
Thank you.
I felt her preparation. It was almost like, I mean, that's a way over.
Yeah.
But I dropped it in a different way.
Okay. Anybody else?
For me, it became very sort of relational very quickly when Cameron pushed on, when I was sitting on my less dominant side, it just sort of rippled, and I just quickly started to, feel like I was going to fall, and sort of like, am I going to catch myself? I don't know. Are you going to catch me? And then on my right side, it was just like, it doesn't matter if you push me or not. It just felt like a wall.
Uh-huh.
But I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got this. I like it. That's a phrase from another generation than mine. I got this. I like it. Anybody else? You good?
We noticed, okay, how can I explain? So the toucher, when the toucher had a difference in the way that they, their approach and the length and all of that, like that was definitely transmitted to the receiver. And we noticed, so for me, the first one, I don't remember, I was on my left foot when she touched my shoulder. It was neutral. There wasn't really much happening. It was stable, neutral, calm. And then the other side, her length of touch was like seconds, like microseconds longer. And she said that, maybe you'll say it. I'll invite you to say what you said. I won't say what you said. But there seemed to be more intention coming in. And so I feel like she told me that after I said, I felt your touch as this like radiation of sparks that I like felt start here and then kind of radiate up here and then kind of stopped. I wasn't intending to. But yeah, I think that intention, and then I have this feeling of like moving towards it. Yeah, like moving up and towards it, you know, and it was an upward movement. I wouldn't necessarily say positive, as in the opposite of negative, but it was like up, like
Toward.
that. Yeah, toward. So, and then when you shared with me about your end.
Yeah, for me, the variables are not only whether you're standing on your lap or right. It's so many nuances in between, like the length of the time before and after, and that little pressure, and also the little difference of the distance between the two persons. They all make different feelings.
And they make different feelings.
And they make different relationships.
And they make different relationships. Perfectly said. Thank you. They make different feelings. They make different relationships. And just to hearing the two of you describe, and also over here, when you describe, there's so much more nuance than we have words for. Yes, I mean, you were struggling for what was this? You know? But we all got it.
Yeah.
But how are we going to put this into words, right? I mean, it's hard to find words. There was a word in body therapy long ago. It was called adience. I don't know if it comes adience. It just means movement towards life. It's a wonderful word, but it's like that came to mind when you said that. Okay, so story number 3. So I got Marcia's call last spring. This was a long time ago, and I went to the gym a few days later, and at the gym where I go, there's a table, and there's a blood pressure cuff on it. Kind of new. You don't have to do the whole wraparound. You just sort of put this thing, and it kind of closes on your arm. You push a button, and it takes your blood pressure. And this fellow, I banter with him. I mean, we're not friends outside the gym, but there's a gym kind of banter thing among guys. I don't know what happens in the girls' level. There's a banter, you know. So, but this was up in the gym, and there's the blood pressure, and I'm walking by, and he says, "Oh no." And I turned around and said, I just sat down opposite him. "What is it?" "Oh, my blood pressure. My doctor says my blood pressure is too high." And he turns the machine around, and I look at it. It was high. Well, when you're 80 and have this kind of blood pressure, you don't want to be in the gym necessarily, but I was sitting across from him and I said, Lacey, hold my hand. I put out my left hand, his right hand was there. He was taking his blood pressure on the other arm. And it was kind of funny. We had a little hand play because he was a little reluctant to hold my hand. There's also a guy thing in gyms about that. Certain gyms and certain guys. there was a thing like, a little resistance in the hand. But he knows I'm a doctor. He calls me doc. And I said, no, just hold my hand. It's okay. And then he took my hand. I said, take it again. Just like that was 30 seconds. Blood pressure came down 20 points.
Oh.
In the systolic, about 10 points in the diastolic. Yeah? I said, well, he said, no, come on. I mean, you're badgering, come on. And I said, you really don't believe it, do it again. He did it again. It came down a couple more points. But I thought, I'm going to tell this group this. Story number 3. What's going on there? What comes up for you about that moment? I just had a moment in the gym, right? What is that? Yeah. It's lots of things, so whatever comes up for you.
I think, conceptually I can jump to a conclusion with very limited science, or I can just tell my personal version. When I feel anxious, or when I feel isolated, or when I feel panicked, or when I feel heightened or charged in some way, and those can be really different qualities and versions.
Right.
Contact with another human, for me, given my pattern and given my needs and given, certain regulatory states and sensory needs, contact will calm almost all of those. It will change the quality of the anxiety, the panic, the nervousness in a way that almost anything else will not impact me as profoundly. So, So this action impacts something in a way that is so fundamental that any talk or thought or idea doesn't work.
Look, if I just said relax, it just wouldn't do it, would it?
That would piss me off.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfectly said. That's exactly.
Yeah. And I can also imagine that for a person that's not, that doesn't have the same organization and pattern and stuff at work that I do, that will do something very different.
Yeah. Wonderfully said. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like this example, he had some discomfort with holding your hand. At the same time, it actually possibly comforted him or possibly regulated him, his heart rate at least.
You're saying at the same time you had some initial discomfort.
Because he mentioned the gym guy thing.
He didn't say anything. There was just I felt it in the hand.
Something.
You know what I mean? Like, hold your hand.
Right.
But it relaxed into it. Yeah. So, what's happening here? I mean, I just want to say, we have blood pressure. We all have a blood pressure. Just like a shoe size. It's not an option. We just have one. We're alive. We have a shoe size. We have a blood pressure. But that blood pressure is so multiply determined. Even your interocular pressure is determined by your blood pressure. And your intracranial pressure, and your cerebrospinal fluid pressure, which can be measured. They're all connected, these pressures, except when they're not. There can be huge blocks in the body. that separate the chest. If that diaphragm becomes like a rock, you can get intra-abdominal pressures that are different than intrathoracic pressures, but normally not. But rock-like, blocks in there, rock-like blocks in the throat can change intraocular, ocular and intracerebrospinal fluid pressures. Amazingly, how those pressures change. And I would even say when you went from one foot to another, you changed everything. Subtly, but you changed the pressure, right? When you talk about, I felt more steady here, I felt more micro wiggly. Do you get where it's all changing in there? And what's changing in there are these cascades of hormonal systems that are going through telling us how we feel and who we're with and what's safe and what's not. And then we sort of put it into, Porges has green light and yellow light and red light. I mean, okay, there's 3. And we've got probably about 1,500. But that's good. I mean, we have a good frame on it to say if a person's green light, they're feeling safe. That's good. But I just want you in that exercise or that story, we're going to have another exercise in a minute, to have that sense of how deep this is bodily when we go to make contact, across a person to the other. Okay. Okay, story number 4. They're just 6. Okay. Intrafusal fibers. Part of your classes so far? I know it's not part of psychology, but intrafusal fibers are the most profound thing to me. That's an arm bone. That's a. Here's the hand out here. Here's going to be a bicep muscle. Expressive arts, right? Okay. So, muscle. Muscle fibers in the muscle, right? And so we have this sense of muscles as being controlled by the brain. And it's kind of a weird concept lately in Western science that the brain controls things. It's really weird. This idea, I mean, given just what we've been doing tonight, how much deeper it is than what we think, right? There's what we think. But we also, even in our field, I think have taken a wrong turn. We talk about, for example, being embodied. Like I'm something and then I got poured into a body. So then I became embodied. I think it's more like when I read carefully about the development of the body, that it's more like we're minded bodies, not embodied spirits, but rather inspirited bodies or mindful bodies. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, I think this came first before.
Yeah, we were talking about this in class.
Oh, were you already?
Something like this,
Yeah.
about, well, can you be, how can you not be involved?
Right.
We talked a little about dissociation, but you're still,
Yeah, even though
your
you-
body's not, you're not necessarily registering certain things, but you're still there.
Right, that's right. How not to be involved. How not to be in touch. We're always in touch. From the moment we were conceived, we're in touch. I mean, conceivably you could be totally naked and jump in the air, but even then you're going to land in a second and be back in touch, right? I mean, we are always in touch, whether it's clothes, ground, everything like that. So, we have this, at least I was taught in biology, that here's the brain up here, and it tells the muscle to fire, and the muscle fires, And every bit of science says this doesn't work this way. It can't work this way. The brain can't get, you get from here to here, the brain can't, I'm gonna swing my arm toward the board, but I'm not gonna hit it, so I'm just not going to. Now that movement, the brain can't tell the hand to stop right there quickly enough. Do you follow what I'm saying? The brain preset that movement. And it not only preset it, but did you see the entire sets of movements? Like, you know. So this thing happened in this one cell organism that was preset when I was going to do that. I mean, this is easy for me, but think about a piano or a pianist or something. Those fingers are moving so much faster than could be one-way signals coming from hit the C note, hit the D note, hit the right, it's the right, and you see those fingers flying, and it's a practiced, preset movement. And what's more, every one of those notes has a, you had the right word, it was like the amount of pressure, the time of the pressure. Every one had all of those aspects that were prefigured into the hitting of the note, right? So what's inside this muscle, every muscle in your body, are little things called intrafusal fibers. I've got some more of this in my notes, so if you want to, please get it up. There's a whole second muscular system in every muscle. These intrafusal fibers have an entirely different set of nerves than these. And they have efferent and afferent fibers. So you follow what I'm saying? It's like from the brain to the brain, to those fibers. And so if you're going to lift something, I'm telling my muscle a whole different set of things here than if I had a 10-pound weight in my. If my muscle thought I had a 10-pound weight in, this would, right, it'd go like that. Which for me it does sometimes. Those intrafusal fibers preset the tensile strength that the muscle is going to need to do the job. Okay, that's step one. You get that? Are you with me on this? Okay. Now, here comes this experiment. We're not going to do it, but they hooked up, impossibly, I don't know how they thought to do this, but they hooked up professional athletes. This was in particular a high jumper named Dwight Stone back in the 80s. He was a high jumper for the U.S. And they hooked him up to EMGs on a practice day, and he jumped with some of this equipment on. And they just sort of like which muscles he's using. He's one of the ones that introduced that sort of back over the thing, So they were studying this. They happened to leave the EMGs on him. And he was sitting watching the next jumper, and the EMG's going. He's just sitting, watching the next jumper. Every muscle that was used in the jump that he was watching was firing in his body as he watched the other jumper. Think about it. Yeah, we think mirror neurons. That is such a primitive concept as to what actually happens. I mean, we get this sort of neuron like I was seeing. This was going on in his entire body. From the littlest toe muscle to the little finger to what that jumper was doing, he was actually reenacting in his body. Now they tried it with people like me, and it just showed that maybe I saw the running, but that's about all I saw. But if it was a professional that knew what was happening, and then they've done this with tennis players and they've done it with other athletes, if the person knows what's happening, you're actually doing it.
Like the other bird.
Their body.
Like what?
Like the other bird that's watching.
The bird that's watching. Exactly. Okay. So, now, I just want you to get how much this is. It makes all the difference to me. I don't know if it will to you. When you hear me say the word, how the system works there is not that hits your eardrum and it goes to some processing place in your brain that says, he just said word. Your larynx, the muscles in your throat actually made that word when you heard it. It made it without moving. And if we hooked up your larynx and your tongue and your throat right now and you were listening to me, some of you are, no. They would all be firing. They're all firing right now. You're actually making the words that you're hearing. You're actually making the movements that you're watching. But you're making them without moving with this intrafusal fiber system, which is in there in a preparatory manner that's telling your body how to be ready to be, what's about to be, what just was, right? Now we get that kind of thing of we are only able to perceive that which we're prepared to respond to, because we're already responding to anything that we perceive. 今日本語に話したらびっくりするでしょ? Not Japanese. Huh? What did you hear? I grew up in Japan, so you heard ba 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 ba, right? You heard sound. But when I said word, you heard word. You made the sound. You've got the sound. You've lived the sound. You know the word. It has meaning, and it touches you into your body. Right? I mean, in the sense that every word that we hear has this infinite set of regressive associations for us. Right? You follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would you frame that if you loop that around to Daniel Stern? Particularly a child that hasn't yet learned to do all these things. How are they recognizing things that they're not able to do yet?
For example, you mean like toddling?
Word, before you know the word. For instance, yeah. A child might know how to mimic, like, mom. Mm-hmm. They might not know more complex and sophisticated language. How are they understanding what their mom or their dad, like, because there is this whole theory that children are more with us than we think. So how are they understanding these things implicitly if they don't yet know how to form the movement or the word or the behavior?
It's like there's a foundational level of our communication, isn't there? So this one was a baby crying in the back seat, and I said to my best friend, I said, it's amazing that this is where language comes from. But children are actually first learning rhythms of language before they learn words. I mean, that's a great, in Daniel Stern's book, The Interpersonal World of the End, they're looking at how the mom is saying, you know, good baby, good baby, good baby. You understand me, don't you? Don't you? You understand, don't you? And adults go into baby talk around babies. Maybe around puppies and dogs too. Right? We go into a certain kind of talking that really is more reliant on the tone and the, what do we call that, like the vocalization more than the word. And then the words kind of emerge out of that into our languaging. I don't think I'm quite getting at your question, but you know, the toddler there gets that something's wrong. They revert to what's right. I mean, meaning eye contact. If that's wrong, back to bodily contact. You follow what I'm saying? And so there's kind of like a learning going on there, because a little older, that pad won't have that meaning anymore. right? You know, the mom will say, get out of here. When it gets 3 or 4. You're with me on this? The brain's developing. Yeah, okay, we'll keep talking about it. We got another one more exercise.
Also, I think at that age, there's a pre-verbal communication. So what's getting communicated through touch and tone and cadence and all of those things, it has more weight. But also,
Much more weight, yeah.
I think this is like the microcosm of what we talk about when we talk about character formation. Like this is the fiber level beginning of it in a way.
Say it again. I'm sorry, I was looking.
This is like the micro level of character formation. So when we see things happening over, we start to develop a muscular resonance with that.
Muscular, hormonal, and whole interconnectedness about that. And we learn body pressures from our families and neighborhoods and cultures, you know, much long before we learn political attitudes or religious attitudes, we are learning how to be. And that's why those conversations get so difficult sometimes, because the substructures are entirely different. Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious as to how these fibers relate with connective tissue. Yeah. Which could be an entire class, but...
I know. The whole web of our sort of connective tissue system, which holds us together, has a much slower pull and less voluntary system that's more dictated by hormonal flows than it is by neurological connection. You know, so the kind of drawing that you get when you feel creepy or frightened, and the kind of relaxation that occurs when things seem mellower, the kind of, you know, those things are more dictated less by neurological than by, remember, hormones are neurotransmitters that act at a distance, so that they're acting throughout the body, making those contractions. And when those contractions are held for a long time, we stop feeling them. Right? Those are connective tissue things.
My yoga teachers, I practice a form of yoga that works a lot on your endocrine system, and she says, if you're too tired to do your kriya, if you're too tired to do your set of poses in the morning, just imagine them, and it'll be pretty much the same.
After those experiments with stone, they began imagining, and the whole Olympic system of our training, I mean, they're going through mental run-throughs of their whatever they do. Yeah. Okay. Story number 5. We have 8:30 or Steve Frankel is a psychologist in the area. I don't know if you've read or thought about him. He teaches a lot about medical, legal, and therapy legal things, websites. He wrote this article, and it's a little disturbing of an article, but I want to give you the image because it's what landed for me about dissociation. He said, you have an intensely traumatized, dissociated client. And it's a simile, I guess. He says, imagine this. Imagine a ghetto in Europe, a Jewish ghetto that's been walled and, what's the word? Oppressed for years. Killings, deportations. And now there's, a few hundred people left in the walled ghetto, and the Allied troops are approaching, and an Allied trooper parachutes into the ghetto ground. That's you, the therapist. And the welcoming committee comes out and you say, I'm here. The war's over. It's all okay now. You can trust me. Right. What's going to happen? You're going to get every response because every conceivable defensive structure got set up in those ghettos. There were people who were hiding, there were people who were sabotaging, there were people who were placating, there were people who were collaborating. Every way to stay alive possible was in that ghetto, and he writes about those in this article. And what he's suggesting is that the clients that we see that have been intensely traumatized throughout their early life and what we call developmental trauma have all of those parts in them. And they sit down with the therapist, and we, in all of our wisdom, say, it's safe here. You're with me now, all right? And we expect to be sort of responded to, maybe as we would be by our classmates or friends. And so we are. Because when we communicate as a part of this interfusal fiber system, which works its way into our meta-communications, when I speak to you, I'm also communicating to you how I want you to hear what I'm saying. It's just a part of our communication, right? If I'm doing this, if I'm sitting, it's like I'm communicating about how I want you to take this information. And our traumatized clients are acutely attuned to this meta-communication about how we want them to be with us. Now touch has become a whole lot more complicated. You get what I'm getting at. So we're going to do another little exercise. And I know time. I think we have time to do this. So, and I'm not going to see that the lecture I knew we wouldn't have time for is subjectivity and intersubjectivity, meaning a state where two people really get into whole contact with one another in some way. But I want you to try something. It's called matching. There's an exercise, and do we still use Don Johnson's books here? Is that?
Don
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
What's that?
Don does.
Don does. I've got an article in one of his books on safety in psychotherapy. But Benke,
Elizabeth, I just read it last night.
no kidding. Wow. Fabulous phenomenologist up in Oregon. I read that article in that book.
Yeah.
It's toward the back of the book. I finally got through the book, and then I said, holy smokes, and I called her. I found her and called her. This was in the 80s, and it turned out she had published a journal for like 20 years on phenomenology. She sent me every issue of her journal. So
Wow.
She could her call.
Right.
it was, she's a fabulous thinker. But let me tell you her exercise.
Who is this?
Elizabeth Benke, Behnke, and I put her in that, and she's in Johnson's book, Breath, Bone, Gesture, Bone, Breath, Gesture. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to remember one of the configurations that you had in your standing exercise. Doesn't matter which one. And then what I want you to do, just think, I think you can think of it without doing it, but you can also stand up if you want. And then what I want you to do is find some part of your body that you feel when you're doing that. Like, for instance, when I feel stronger on my left leg, I feel more like solid here, and over here I feel a little more like my hip goes out a little bit here, and I'm a little more relaxed something, and here it's more, okay. So I'm going to do this. Either one's fine, but I'm going to do this, and then one place I feel that is right here in my thigh. So here's the exercise. I'm going to make that tension in my thigh sitting down first. Now I'll walk you through it whatever you do. If you notice something here, if you notice something in your arm, or whatever you notice, something what she would call salient, something that stands out a little bit. And then what I want you to do is to make that tension intentional. And so that with your whole self, you match that tension. You with me?
So not just in that local place.
Not just in that place, but with your whole self, you make that tension. Okay? Okay. So if you need to stand up to kind of remember something, do that. Just kind of find what you're going to use. Bring it into mind. It could be something about when you were touched. It could be when you were just standing. And then when you got it, find it in a local place, and then come and sit and make it general and intentional. If you can. I want you to try to do this in a very accepting way, meaning this is not a critical exercise, it's an exploratory exercise. And then when you're ready, come on back in the room. And tell me what you felt or sensed.
Felt very strong. Like when I stand, I feel strong, like a yoga mountain pose. When I sit, I don't feel strong. So sitting and thinking of standing made me feel a strong seated posture.
Sort of, you brought that kind of strength into a whole body intentional state. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Perfect. Anybody else? This exercise just has 2 steps, so we have a lot of time to talk about this. But, yeah.
I started with this feeling in my right foot that felt like there was pressure against the ground and kind of tension. And then when I did it in my whole body, I got really tired. Because, I just felt that tightening everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And with weight and pressure. All on the side.
And could you say anything about the attitude that would bring about?
Emotional attitude? Or
Sorry.
emotional attitude?
Yeah, or
It felt, it certainly felt familiar. It felt like this is what working hard or being earnest.
on being earnest.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
I when I stand on my left side, I feel kind of like a sinking into, which feels nice when I'm standing. But then there's kind of like a collapsing that happens in my waist. And when I brought that into my whole body, it felt like a freeze. Collapse is actually not relaxing, but it was like the opposite of mobilization.
Bless you. You see how difficult words are for this. Yeah. I just want you, as you're studying all of these things, to know how difficult it is to translate this into a culture of therapy where the message is fix it. Right? I've been told all my life that something's wrong with me, and I've finally now come to accept that something's wrong with me. So I'm going to come to you and I want you to fix it. And the poor soul gets the wrong therapist, they say, well, sit up straight and it'll be better, or something, right? Like try to make you more normal. But that's exactly where the problem lay, right? In trying, actually, the stances that we have were our attempt to fix it, by and large. And then the person's trying to fix the fix instead of that deep in us are these less attractive, more wounded places that we don't want to show, and that our stances by and large, which we call defenses or security operations, were meant to hide. But so we're looking for ways as somatic therapists to help with that. I just don't want us to ever get the idea that that's simple. It's extremely complicated, given the culture that we're in and the therapy culture that we're in. Faster is better. You know, change your mind, change your ways. It's much easier to change your mind than it is to change your life. I like that. So one more step here. What I want you to do is, well, if you can, Marcia, you were in your foot. Well, you could do this. Wherever it was, I want you to put, wherever you started, before you brought it to your whole body, I want you just to, that local spot, and then if you can, to put your hand there. And then feel that feeling that you were feeling. And then bring it into your hand and see if you can match the feeling that's in that spot with your hand as it's touching that spot. You're matching. So trying to see with your hand if you can exactly sort of replicate that. Now here's the really tricky part. Do it in that spot, bring it into your hand, match it with your hand, and just wait and see what happens. Anywhere in you, in your body, there or anywhere else. Now it takes patience sometimes, but it's just to hold that matching and notice, allow what wants to happen to happen.
Like it spread, but it was pretty bizarre. And I don't know what to make of it, and I'm not particularly interested in making anything of it.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. There's some pretty bizarre things can happen when you start attending to the body. It's true. It's just, and we don't have words for it. We don't have good language for it. We don't have good interpersonal communication for it. And I think that's where body psychotherapy comes in wonderfully well, if the person can make a relationship such that it's green light, right? that it is, the person can experiment to do such a thing and report on it and wonder about it, because it comes back. These things, when you're, particularly if you're in therapy working, it'll come back in your dreams, it'll come back in your bodily feelings, it'll come back in your relationships, and you'll be watching your favorite movie and you'll see something and say, that's what that was. You see what I mean? I mean, that we've got images all around us and all of that. Yeah, what happened there?
That's it. That's why I'm not particularly interested in posing my own idea on what happened, because I think
exactly.
it'll show up later in a more interesting way.
Yeah, it will, and when we open to that, it can, and in deep ways. Oh, well, I feel this exhaustion, but I get to. So let me close. Let me read something to you, okay? There's this book that came out. It's called The Handbook of Body Psychotherapy. What we know about that here?
Yeah, we all have it.
And so, You know, I bought one at the conference, and somebody stole it. At the conference. A Somatics person, can you believe it's still that? It was in my briefcase.
How could they even carry it away?
I know. But everybody had them, so I couldn't say, wait.
You didn't put your name in it yet.
I didn't. But at that talk, there was a wonderful talk by Gustav Matlock, who's a German body psychotherapist. And I just want to read what he said about this. And just getting into this idea of this wonderful description here, because I think what happens in the body, like in the brain with dissociation, the problem is not that we can't solve the problem is that we've locked the problem away from the rest of us. That's kind of what the EMDR is based on, is like what other forms of things are based on, but we're trying to kind of get participation from all of us on this problem, which we've locked away into this muscle or this joint or this. Said Littlemore Johnson or who's the body dynamics, Elizabeth Marshall. Every muscle in your body is a sentient being. It's a wonderful concept of mindful being. Every muscle. And when you work developmentally, every muscle, when it comes online, when it gets innervated and makes that connection, is in a particular part of development, of reaching, of receiving, of all of these things. And so there's muscles, whether they're sentient in that way or not, or whether they're just imbued with what was happening for us when that muscle was developing, right? And if you can imagine that your legs were being beaten when you were learning to walk, for example, or you were being told to walk before you could walk. What happens in that regard, just to show you, is what the child does is evoke involuntary muscles to walk, so that instead of walking in this sort of coordinated way, there's this tightening like of the viscera of the leg, and the walk becomes like this. And you will see this. You just have to go out on Market Street to see these muscles that have been traumatized into doing what they're not supposed to be doing, to try to do what's being asked. So here's what Gustav said. At the same time, it's important to develop space and tolerance in the therapeutic dialogue for those injured, insufficient, least glamorous experiences and aspects of the personality. These aspects of ourselves are usually split off and kept in the body. The old, more expressive techniques of body psychotherapy are not of much help here. Because essentially it's not about expression or change, but about a felt reassociation of those unloved, denied, and split off emotional aspects of ourselves. It's above all the body which carries the split off, unhappy, and wounded parts of ourselves and expresses these often in a myriad of psychosomatic symptoms, in a language that's difficult to understand, because the suffering and the screaming usually don't get beyond the body level. As therapists, we need less techniques here and more of compassion and a willingness to recognize the suffering that we see and that we share. That's sort of how he ended his talk, and it was very meaningful to us. That's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me. And if who's on the speaking committee, have me back next year, but you'll probably just show the videotape.
So we could do part two.
Good.
This is very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.